of the world. In the history of human literature, there have been many traitors, famous traitors that have long been remembered and condemned. But among them all, there is one name that is remembered, one name that comes first to our lips when we think of a traitor. And his name, we are told, was Judas Iscariot. What did he do? Not all that much, really. He simply told the enemies of his friends where his friend might be found at a private moment. That was about it. But because of who that person was and because of what followed, the name of Judas Iscariot has gone down in infamy. How bad is the name of Judas? So bad that, I don't know if you know this, but in many abattoirs, places, facilities where animals are slaughtered and butchered, there's a tradition of keeping what is called a Judas goat. Now, the Judas goat is a goat that has been bred and trained to bond with a herd of cattle or a flock of sheep. It gets those animals to trust it. And then it leads those animals up the chute and through the door and into the slaughterhouse. The Judas goat is saved at the last minute, of course, set free to bond with yet another herd and lead it to its peaceful, orderly demise. How would you like to know that one of your legacies was to have such a despicable animal named after you? That is what happened to Judas. And because of this reputation of Judas as the ultimate traitor, we have this tendency not really to identify with him at all. We see him as someone very different from us, someone unlike us in every way. And you can actually demonstrate this. I remember some time ago reading a book in which the author went through the history of the depiction of Jesus and the disciples in Western art. As you know, hundreds of pictures, famous pictures, have been painted of this famous group. And if you go through those pictures down through history, you will see again and again that these 12 disciples and Jesus are painted in such a way that we can identify with them. Which is to say that they look like us. They are painted to look like Western Europeans. This is, of course, despite the fact that history tells us that they were all Jews. They don't look like Jews in the paintings. With one exception. One of the 12 is always, in the history of Western art, depicted as very distinctively Jewish, with the traditional stereotypic Jewish traits like the hooked nose. The message is very clear. Judas is Jewish. The rest of them aren't really. The rest of them are like us, but Judas is not. And so, in the Western world, Judas was largely identified with the Jewish nation in particular, in a way that Jesus never was. Ironically, of course. And you know where some of that led. It led to some terrible anti-Semitic attitudes in Western civilization, terrible crimes committed against the Jews because they were seen as a type of Judas. And that is a part of our heritage as Christians in the Western world, and one we must absolutely reject. But it is not just this effect of this way of seeing Judas that troubles me today. There is another problem with us failing to identify with Judas. There's another problem with us seeing him as different from us. Because if we cannot identify with him, we cannot identify with his struggles, with his decisions, with his actions. And I think that we need to. Because whatever else he is, Judas is a human being like us, tempted and motivated in the very same ways. And if he did it, why couldn't we? And so we need to look at that question. Why would he do it? Why did he do what he did? I mean, here we have a man who was faithful to Jesus, who had chosen to follow him from the early days, who had listened to all of his teachings. Judas, who had been sent out together with the others to preach the good news in the towns and villages of Galilee. He was with Jesus 100%, and yet, in the end, he decided to turn against him, to betray him. Why would he do that? Now, of course, the first and most obvious reason we must consider is this. Did he do it for the money? Was that what it was all about? Just for the money? 30 pieces of silver was indeed a considerable amount of money. And if I know myself and if I know us as human beings, money can be a very powerful lure. And sometimes, when money's not in the equation, you can have firm convictions, you can make clear decisions, and then money comes into the picture, and things just change. So we need to ask that question. What would you do for the sake of money? What would you give up? What would you pay for the sake of money? And sometimes it is surprising what we would do. I'm going to just give you a simple, everyday example. A few years ago, our family actually came to a conviction, a strong conviction. We had done some reading, we had done some studying of sources, and we came to a conviction that we believed in recycled toilet paper. It was really important to us. We would use recycled toilet paper, and I know that might sound like an insignificant thing to some of you, but actually the fact of the matter is that there is a great deal of environmental destruction that is caused by how manufacturing companies source materials for their toilet paper. So we looked into that and discovered that you can actually make a significant difference by simply choosing on a consistent basis to use recycled toilet paper. And that's what we did. We found a source of decent recycled toilet paper for a reasonable price, and we were happy with that decision. A few months ago, though, we decided to join Costco. Now, if you go to Costco, what I'm sure many of you do, you will know that one of the really great deals you get at Costco is on the toilet paper, right? I mean, yeah, you have to buy, I think it's like, 3 million rolls? But, man, you get that stuff. A really good price. So we went to Costco, we saw the toilet paper. The only toilet paper that we could find at that fantastic price was the store brand. It wasn't recycled. Okay. So we had our convictions, we made our decisions, right? So obviously we knew what we would do. We would just leave that toilet paper and go someplace else and pay more for the recycled stuff, right? Obviously. Well, I'm sad to say good, cheap, quality toilet paper. What were we going to do? We bought it. Now, I am very glad to say that the local Costco has since seen the light and now actually stocks a recycled toilet paper at a decent price. It's good. And we have gone back to our convictions. But our momentary lapse makes me wonder. I mean, if I'm willing to give up an important conviction like that for the sake of a few dollars on toilet paper, what else might I give up for the sake of a little bit of money? What else? I have firm convictions convictions on equality, convictions on murder, on theft, all kinds of things. But how often and how severely have they been tested? How much money would it take for me to give up on one of them? And if it's a question of how much, then what kind of conviction do I really have? How much money would it take? What would you give up for the sake of some money? What have you in your life given up for the sake of some money? You've given up on some dream for the sake of money? Have you given up on your connection to someone or something really important for the sake of money? Money's a good thing. Money is a thing with which you can do great things, with which you can support the people you care for, with which you can support the things that really matter to you. But if you start to do things just for the sake of money, I tell you, you will regret it. If it's just about the money. I mean, we're told in the end, when Judas saw the results of his actions, when he saw what happened to Jesus, he was willing to take that money and throw it away. Throw it away like so much garbage on the floor of the temple. For the end, the value of money is but an illusion. And we must always be careful what we give up for the sake merely of money. So that's if Judas did it for the money. But I suspect there's probably got to be more to the story than that. I mean, if Judas is a real human being, his motivations would have been complex. There must have been more to the story than just the money. Is there any indications in the story of some other reason why Judas might have done what he did? Well, let me suggest to you there is, and let me suggest you take a look in particular at the man's name that is given to us. He is called Judas Iscariot, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because it's like he's the only guy in the whole New Testament who has a last name. And this was in an age where Jews simply did not have last names. So actually it's not a last name. What it appears to be is a nickname. Maybe a nickname given to him by Jesus or by the other disciples, or more likely, I suspect, by the gospel writers. And the thing is, we think we know what that name might mean. The name might be another form of another word, and that word is Sicarii. The Sicarii were a group of people who were active in Judea in the years following the death of Jesus. And who were the Sicarii? They were terrorists. I can find no better way to describe them and what they did. They were terrorists. The favorite tactic of the Sicarii was to wait for a crowd to form, maybe for some official event. And when the people came together, the Sicarii would infiltrate themselves into the crowd. And then, at a secret signal that everyone agreed upon, they would suddenly pull out their little daggers that they carried hidden on their person. This dagger was called a CK, which is, of course, where the name comes from. And they would take their daggers and they would assassinate some random person in the crowd, and then slip away in the ensuing confusion. Can you imagine the terror that followed on such attacks? Can you imagine the panic that spread through the populace? Well, the Sicarii were using that terror to achieve their goals. They, like so many terrorists before them and since, were using terror as a tool. They would have felt very much at home, I'm afraid, among ISIL and other terrorist groups that work in the world even today. goal was the defeat of Rome. Their goal was to get Rome out of Judea. Their goal was to start a violent revolution against Rome. And it was a goal that many other Jews in their day shared. Very few Jews, except those who benefited directly, liked Roman rule. And to the extent that Jesus himself challenged Roman rule, to the extent to which Jesus himself was crucified by the Romans for his activities. In some ways, Jesus may have been sympathetic to some of their goals, but, this is a very big but, Jesus never would have agreed with their tactics. For Jesus taught and proclaimed that nothing good can be achieved. Not even the best of goals can be achieved through terror and violence. On the contrary, he said, rather than terrorizing your enemies, you must love them, you must pray for them, and when they attack you, you must turn the other cheek. The Sicarii would have laughed at them, and no doubt did. And so if Judas Iscariot, if Judas the Sicarii, was at all sympathetic to their goals, he may eventually have gotten tired of Jesus and his nonviolent message. And he may have ultimately decided that Jesus had to go, and even have decided to make sure that Jesus went in such a way, because Jesus was a popular preacher, that it provoked a violent revolt. And Judas may have even been willing to work with the priests and take their money, seemingly to use it for the revolution, in order to get to that goal. I mean, we don't know. There's no way of knowing if that's really what motivated him. It's only speculation. But given his name and what that might signify, I can well imagine this as something that could motivate Judas. So we have this idea, this notion of Judas basically as an idealist, doing it all in service of an idea, being willing to do a terrible thing, to give up a good and righteous man for the sake of advancing an idea. And that's a scary thought, because you know what? We all have ideas. We all have good ideas. And the question is, what would we give up for the sake of our ideas? We must always ask ourselves that question. Even for the best of ideas, what would you give up? For example, for security. For the sake of security, would you give up your freedom? It seems to be a question that Canadians are struggling with these days. For the sake of political stability, would you give up democracy? What would you give up for the sake of an idea? I think it's important to note that we as Christians, we are not followers of an idea or of any idea. We are followers of a person. A person who has revealed to us the love and the nature and the power of God. A person who is still with us and continues to guide us in real ways today and now. We do not serve an idea, we serve a person. We have ideas, but we put the person above the ideas. And you know what? If ever in the life of the church we take some idea, whether that idea be purity or righteousness or justice, whether that idea be the church itself, and put it ahead of the person, ahead of Jesus, we could well set ourselves on the course that would lead us to betraying everything that Jesus stands for. In the history of the world, people have done terrible things for the sake of money. But I would say, in the history of the world, people have done far worse things for the sake of ideas, even good and noble ideas. We're all Judas. He's not different from us. He faced his test, he faced his temptation, and we will too. And we need to ask ourselves, what would you give up? For the sake of the money, for the sake of the idea, whatever it is. Don't give up any of that lightly. This little bag of 30 pieces of silver stands for us as a symbol of the struggle we may face, of the decisions we might have to make as we go through life. And I pray we do not stumble over them on our way to Calvary this year. Let us take a few moments in silent reflection.